Meet the Wheelers, so brave and so true. A mystical journey is waiting for you. Dad Arthur can fix it, Mom Ellie can steer. With Max and with Lily, there's nothing to fear. Barley's our dog, a magic retriever. 3 wishes a day for the magic believer. I'm Elias, your guide to this grand library. Buckle up, friends, let's make history!
Hello again, my little travelers. Tonight, the Wheelers find themselves in a place where one becomes two and where magic finds its own dark shadow. Let's follow them into the shimmer. The Labyrinth of Reflections. Chapter 1. The Canyon of 1,000 Glances. The Wander-Wagon rolled slowly onto a road that felt less like dirt and more like polished bone. As the dust cleared behind the wheels, the family fell into a stunned silence. They had entered the Mirror Canyon, a deep, jagged scar in the earth where the walls were not made of sandstone or granite, but of pure, seamless obsidian and crystalline glass. The sun was high above, and its light didn't just fall into the canyon. It exploded. Every surface caught a beam and threw it at another, creating a web of blinding brilliance that made the inside of the trailer feel like the heart of a diamond. "Everyone, eyes shut, or at least squint," Dad Arthur barked, leaning forward over the steering wheel. He fumbled for his heavy, dark-tinted driving goggles. "I can't see the road! Everything is glowing, and I can't tell the difference between the actual ground and the reflection of the sky." Mom Ellie was shielding her eyes with her hand, trying to look at the dashboard. "The temperature is rising, Arthur. All these mirrors are acting like magnifying glasses. We're being slow-cooked in our own home." She was right. The interior of the Wander-Wagon was becoming an oven. The air was thick, dry, and smelled of hot metal. Max was slumped at the small dinette table, his t-shirt sticking to his back. Even his headphones felt too heavy in this heat. "I can't breathe," Max groaned. "It feels like the sun is sitting in the passenger seat." Little Lily, despite the heat, was staring out the window in fascination. "Look, I can see 7 of us. No, 14. There are so many Wander-Wagons in the walls." Barley, the golden retriever, was panting heavily, his tongue lolling out as he searched for a cool spot on the floorboards. He looked up at Max with sympathetic eyes, his golden collar shimmering in the intense light. The family hadn't used a single wish yet today, meaning they still had all 3 left. The collar remained silent and mysterious, but the air around the dog pulsed with a soft, ready energy. Okay, Dad Arthur said, wiping sweat from his brow. "We need a fix. We can't stop here, or the tires will melt. Barley, buddy, we need a hand. Or in your case, the nose. Give us one high-powered, oscillating industrial fan, something to move this air." Barley stood up, shaking his fur. He trotted to the center of the living area, took a deep, shaky breath of the hot air, and tilted his head back. "Up-choo! Up-choo! Up-choo!" His collar erupted in a brilliant, steady golden light. As the magic surged, something strange happened. Usually, a single object would materialize out of the golden dust, but as the sparkles hit the air of the Mirror Canyon, they seemed to hit an invisible wall and bounce. With 2 distinct pops, 2 identical fans appeared on the floor. 2? Max sat up, his eyes widening. "Wait, did he double sneeze? That's a bonus!" "The canyon," Mom Ellie whispered, her voice tinged with sudden caution. "Look at the walls, Max. The magic didn't just happen. It reflected." At first, it seemed like a stroke of incredible luck. Dad Arthur grabbed the first fan and plugged it into the dashboard outlet. Immediately, a stream of icy, refreshing air blasted into the front of the cabin. "Oh, that's the stuff! That's life-saving!" Max grabbed the second fan. It looked exactly like the first: chrome blades, a sturdy base, and a blue on switch. He set it on the table and flicked it to high. For exactly 10 seconds, it was perfect. And then, the sound changed. The second fan didn't hum. It started to growl. The blades, instead of pushing the air forward, began to spin with a violent, unnatural speed. But instead of blowing air out, the fan began to suck the air in. It wasn't cooling the room. It was inhaling the coolness. Dad? Max yelled over the rising roar of the machine. Something is wrong with the bonus fan. The second fan began to glow with a sickly, inverted violet light. The air it threw out the back wasn't just hot. It was scorching, filled with a fine, stinging grit like desert sand. It was working in perfect, dark opposition to the first fan. While the first one made the cabin livable, the second was determined to turn it into a furnace. "Turn it off!" Mom Ellie cried, shielding Lily. Max slammed his hand onto the switch, but it wouldn't budge. The on button had fused into the metal. The machine began to rattle the entire table, its base heating up until the wood started to smoke. "It's an anti-fan!" Dad Arthur shouted from the driver's seat. "It's doing the exact opposite of what we asked for." With a grunt of effort, Dad Arthur reached back, grabbed the vibrating, growling machine by its cord, and hurled it out the side window. It hit the obsidian floor of the canyon and shattered into 1,000 violet sparks. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sweet, cool hum of the first, real fan. "Why did that happen?" Lily asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Mom Ellie didn't answer immediately. She reached for her living map, hoping for a route out. But as she unrolled the parchment, she gasped. The map was magical, and as the ink began to draw the path ahead, the mirror canyon did its work. On the surface of the map, the ink split. 2 identical red lines appeared, snaking across the paper. One pointed toward a high mountain pass, and the other pointed directly into a dark, bottomless chasm. "I see it now," Mom Ellie said, her face pale in the reflected light. "It's not us. It's the magic. These mirrors don't just reflect light, they reflect power. Every bit of magic we use is being copied, but the copy is a distorted twin, a shadow that works against the light." Dad Arthur gripped the wheel tighter, looking at the 2 paths appearing in the mirrors ahead. "Which means every time we use barley, we're making our own enemies." The Labyrinth of Reflections, Chapter 2, The Dual Path and the Shadow Lantern. The Wander-Wagon rumbled forward, the cool air from the real fan providing a small sanctuary of comfort inside the cabin. But outside, the world was becoming a nightmare of geometry. The obsidian walls grew taller, leaning over the road until they nearly touched, creating a tunnel of endless, repeating images. Dad Arthur squinted through his dark goggles, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The road is shifting, Ellie. Or at least, it looks like it is. Every time I look at a mirror wall, I see 3 different versions of the path ahead." Mom Ellie was still staring at her living map. The enchanted ink was frantic. On the parchment, 2 identical red arrows were pulsing. One pointed toward a narrow, rocky climb to the left. The other pointed toward a smooth, inviting tunnel to the right. "The map is being torn in 2, Mom Ellie said, her voice tight with focus. "Because the map itself is magical, the canyon has created a shadow route. One of these paths leads to the exit, and the other likely leads to a drop-off that doesn't exist until you fall into it." "Can't we just pick one?" Max asked, leaning over his mother's shoulder. "It's not that simple, Max," Mom Ellie replied. "In this canyon, seeing is believing, but believing can be fatal. If we choose the wrong path, the shadow magic will make the ground feel solid right up until the moment we lose our grip. The canyon began to darken as the walls leaned closer. The brilliant, explosive sunlight from before was replaced by a deep, violet twilight. The obsidian walls no longer sparkled. They loomed, dark and hungry. "I can't see the edges of the road anymore," Dad Arthur grunted, breaking the trailer to a crawl. "It's pitch black in the reflections. Barley, buddy, I hate to do this, but we need light. Not a searchlight, just a simple, honest lantern to show us where the dirt ends and the glass begins." Barley stood up from the rug, his tail giving a hesitant wag. He looked at Mom Ellie, then at the dark walls outside. He sensed the tension. He walked to the front of the van, sat between the two front seats, and closed his eyes. "Apchoo! Apchoo!" His collar flared with a steady golden pulse. This time, the family was ready. They watched as the golden dust swirled in the air, clashing against the invisible mirror of the canyon's atmosphere. Pop! Pop! Two identical brass lanterns appeared on the dashboard. They were beautiful, old-fashioned lamps with flickering wicks. "Okay," Dad Arthur whispered. "Max, grab the one on the left. I'll take the one on the right." Max reached out and took the left-hand lantern. The moment his fingers touched the handle, the wick flared with a warm, amber glow. It was a perfect light. It cut through the violet gloom and showed the grainy, real texture of the road. "This one's real," Max said, a sigh of relief escaping his lips. "I can see the pebbles and the tire tracks." But then, the second lantern, the one on the right, began to react. It didn't stay still. It didn't flicker with amber light. Instead, it began to leak a thick, smoky substance that wasn't smoke at all. It was dark light. The flame inside the second lantern was a piercing electric white, but instead of illuminating the world, it cast shadows that moved on their own. Where the first lantern showed the road, the second lantern's light touched the walls and made them vanish into a bottomless, starry void. "Dad, stop the van!" Lily screamed. Dad Arthur slammed on the brakes just as the front tires reached a patch of ground illuminated by the shadow lantern. To Arthur's eyes, the road in front of him had completely disappeared. It looked like he was about to drive off a cliff into deep space. "I can't see the ground!" Dad Arthur shouted, his boots trembling on the brake pedal. "The light is erasing the world!" "It's a void lamp," Mom Ellie realized, shielding her eyes. "The first lamp shows the truth, but the second one creates a reflection of nothingness. It's making the solid ground look like an empty chasm." The shadow lantern began to hum, a high-pitched, crystalline sound that vibrated in their teeth. The dark light it emitted started to spread, swallowing the amber glow of the real lantern. The dashboard began to look like it was melting into shadows. The steering wheel seemed to turn into smoke under Dad Arthur's hands. "It's eating the wagon!" Max cried, trying to grab the handle of the shadow lantern to throw it out, but his hand passed right through it. "I can't touch it! It's made of darkness, not metal!" "Don't touch the shadow lantern, Max. We don't know what it can do to us," Mom Ellie warned. "Maybe it can make your arm part of the reflection." Barley let out a sharp, panicked bark. He lunged forward and, with a quick snap of his jaws, grabbed the real lantern, the brass one, and jumped out of the side door onto the road. "Barley, come back!" Lily sobbed. But the dog knew what he was doing. As long as the real lantern was inside the wagon, the shadow lantern stayed inside to counter it. By taking the source of the magic outside, Barley drew the dark light toward him. The shadow lantern on the dashboard flickered, turned into a streak of violet smoke, and shot out the window to follow its twin. Outside, in the dark gorge, the family watched as two circles of light and dark danced. One circle showed the dusty road and the safety of the path. The other circle showed a shimmering blur. Barley stood perfectly still, the real lantern in his mouth, while the shadow lamp hovered 5 feet away, trying to erase the very ground the dog stood on. He's trapped, Dad Arthur whispered, his heart pounding. If he moves, he might step into the shadow. If he stays, the dark light will eventually swallow the real flame. Mom Ellie looked at her hands, then at the obsidian walls. Arthur, we can't use magic to save him. The canyon will just double the danger. We have to use the mirrors. We have to use the canyon itself. She looked up at the high crystalline walls and saw the way the fading twilight hit a jagged edge of glass. She saw a way out, but it would require Dad Arthur's precision and Max's steady hand. The Labyrinth of Reflections. Chapter 3. The Gravity of Shadows and the Obsidian Wall. Barley stood like a golden statue in the middle of the road, the brass handle of the real lantern gripped firmly in his teeth. The amber light cast a flickering, warm glow on his fur, but just 3 feet to his right, the shadow lantern hovered, a silent, predatory void. It was an anti-flame, a hole in reality that made the solid rock beneath it look like a bottomless pit of stars. If he moves even an inch to the right, he'll think he's falling, Max whispered, his face pressed against the glass of the Wander-Wagon's window. And if he thinks he's falling, the canyon will make it real. We can't use another wish, Mom Ellie said, her voice sharp with the clarity of a strategist. If we ask Barley for a rope, the canyon will give us a shadow rope that trips him. If we ask for a bridge, we get a bridge to nowhere. We have to stop using magic. We have to use the physics of this place. Dad Arthur adjusted his goggles. His mechanical mind was already whirring, calculating angles of reflection. He looked at the obsidian walls, then at the weak, yellow beam of his industrial flashlight, the one that ran on simple, non-magical batteries. Max, grab the emergency mirrors from the tool chest, Dad Arthur commanded. The ones I use to look under the chassis. And Lily, I need your shiny silver sunshade, the one we put on the windshield. As Max and Lily scrambled to gather the items, the Wander-Wagon creaked. The shadow lantern's influence was growing. The side of the trailer closest to the dark light was beginning to look translucent, as if the metal were turning into ghost mist. Hurry, Mom Ellie urged. The reflection is starting to claim the wagon. Dad Arthur hopped out of the driver's seat, staying carefully on the left side of the road, far from the void. He took the small rectangular mirrors from Max and the crinkly silver sunshade from Lily. Here's the plan, Dad Arthur muttered, his eyes darting between the jagged glass peaks above them. The shadow lantern is a reflection of the real lantern's light. It's a parasite. If we can drown out the real lantern's light with natural light, even just a simple flashlight, we can confuse the shadow logic of the canyon. Mom Ellie caught on instantly. If we create a hall of mirrors using the sunshade and your flashlight, we can create a path of truth that the shadow lantern can't erase because the light isn't magical. They moved into action. Dad Arthur propped the silver sunshade against a rock, angling it so it faced Barley. Max stood 10 feet back, holding 2 small hand mirrors at a 45-degree angle. Now, Max, shine the flashlight into the first mirror, Dad Arthur yelled. Max clicked the button. The simple, battery-powered beam hit the first mirror, bounced to the second, and then hit the silver sunshade. The shade acted like a massive reflector, bathing Barley in a bright, artificial, but completely non-magical white light. The effect was instantaneous. Because the light from the flashlight was earthly and not created by Barley's collar, the mirror canyon didn't know how to double it. There was no shadow flashlight. The shadow lantern flickered. It began to spin in circles, confused by the sudden presence of a light source it couldn't mirror. The void on the ground started to shrink, the fake stars being replaced by the solid, dusty reality of the road. Barley, now! Come to the wagon! Mom Ellie called. Barley didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, sprinting through the non-magical light beam. The moment he crossed the threshold and jumped back into the Wander-Wagon, the real lantern in his mouth vanished. Its magical duration had ended. With the source of the magic gone, the shadow lantern let out a final, frustrated hiss and imploded into a tiny speck of violet dust. The road returned to normal. The wagon solidified. "We did it," Max panted, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Science 1, magic 0. "Don't celebrate yet," Dad Arthur said, pointing through the windshield. The road had come to a dead end. Blocking their path was the great obsidian wall, a sheet of black glass so tall and so smooth that it looked like the end of the world. It was a perfect mirror. In it, the Wander-Wagon was reflected with terrifying clarity. But it wasn't just a reflection. Inside the glass wall, a shadow Wander-Wagon was parked right in front of them. And as Arthur nudged the real van forward, the shadow van nudged forward too. "It's blocking us," Mom Ellie whispered, her map now glowing a frantic, warning red. "The wall is the heart of the canyon. To get out, we have to pass through the reflection. But if we hit that wall, we hit ourselves." This is the final stretch of the Mirror Canyon. The family must face the ultimate paradox: how to move forward when your own reflection is standing in your way. The Labyrinth of Reflections. Chapter 4. The Singular Truth. The great obsidian wall loomed over them like a silent, dark god. In its polished surface, the Wander-Wagon looked perfect. Too perfect. Every scratch on the paint, every dent in the bumper was mirrored back with a sharp, crystalline edge. Dad Arthur eased the van forward until the real bumper was only inches away from the reflected one. He could see the shadow Arthur through the glass, his hands gripping a shadow steering wheel. The air outside grew cold, a shivering vibration coming from the wall as if the two versions of reality were competing for the same space. "The map is bleeding, Arthur," Mom Ellie said, her voice a ghost of a whisper. She held up the birch bark parchment. The ink was running in two different directions, turning into a messy, violet blotch. "The canyon is trying to decide which of us is the original. If we stay here too long, the reflection might just step out." Max looked at the shadow Max in the glass. The boy in the mirror wasn't wearing headphones. He was wearing a pair of dark, obsidian muffs that seemed to swallow sound. The shadow lily wasn't holding a stuffed rabbit. She was holding a gray stone shaped like one. "It's not just copying us anymore," Max realized, his voice trembling. "It's changing us. It's trying to make the shadow version better so the canyon can keep it." "We can't use magic to break it," Dad Arthur muttered, staring at the wall. "If I ask Barley to sneeze and blast a hole in this glass, the wall will just create a magical shadow blast that hits us twice as hard. We'll destroy ourselves before we even crack the surface." "The industrial fan! Max, bring the fan to the front!" Mom Ellie commanded. The family moved with the synchronized grace of a team that had survived a dozen worlds. Mom Ellie turned the real fan, the one Barley had created at the very beginning, which was still humming on the dashboard. "This fan is the only magic left. It's the anchor the canyon is holding on to. We're going to give the canyon exactly what it wants, a reflection it can't handle." Mom Ellie took the magical fan and placed it on the bonnet of car facing the wall. She turned the speed to max. The icy air blasted against the obsidian glass. Immediately, a shadow fan appeared inside the wall, blowing a blast of hot, sandy air back at them. The two forces, magical cold and magical heat, met at the surface of the glass. The air began to crackle with violet electricity. "Now, Arthur, throw the van into gear," Mom Ellie yelled. "And Barley, don't sneeze, don't wish, just bark. Bark as loud as you can." Barley understood. He stood on the engine cover, his golden collar dark and silent. He didn't use the spark. he used his lungs. He let out a thunderous, earth-shaking boof that vibrated through the metal of the van. Crack! A single hairline fracture appeared in the center of the wall, right where the cold air met the hot air. "Go, Arthur! Go!" Max screamed. Dad Arthur floored the accelerator. The Wander-Wagon roared. The tires spun on the polished bone road, gripping the grit that wasn't reflected. They didn't hit a solid wall. They hit a dream that was falling apart. With a sound like a million glass bells shattering at once, the Wander-Wagon burst through the great obsidian wall. There was a flash of blinding violet light, a moment of weightlessness, and then thud. The tires hit soft, honest brown dirt. The air was no longer a magnifying glass. It was just the warm, dry breeze of the open desert. The blinding glare vanished, replaced by the gentle orange glow of a setting sun. Dad Arthur slammed on the brakes and killed the engine. Silence rushed into the cabin. For a long minute, nobody moved. They just listened to the tick, tick, tick of the cooling engine. Max reached out and touched the dashboard. It was solid. He looked in the rearview mirror. He saw only one Max, sweaty, tired, and very real. Lily looked out the back window. The Mirror Canyon was gone. Behind them was only a normal mountain pass, dusty and stone gray. Barley jumped down and gave himself a massive shake, his fur fluffing back up. He trotted over to Lily and licked her hand. His collar was still dark, but he looked prouder than if he had performed 1,000 tricks. "Well," Dad Arthur said, pulling off his goggles and rubbing his eyes, "I think I've had enough of buy one, get one free for a lifetime." Mom Ellie unrolled her map. The ink was back to its normal, steady red. One arrow. One path. One destination. She smiled and tucked the birch bark sketch into her journal. "We did it without a magic, Arthur. We did it by being the only ones in the room." Max put his headphones back on and hit play. "You know, having a twin might have been cool for chores, but I don't think I could handle a version of me that likes country music." They drove on into the cooling night, a single family in a vast world, perfectly happy to be exactly who they were. The end. The mirrors have faded, and the echoes of the labyrinth are finally quiet. In that maze of silver and light, the Wheelers learned that the strongest magic isn't found in a perfect image, but in the simple act of holding hands and trusting one another. They realized that as long as they stay together, no illusion can ever lead them astray. Sometimes, the clearest view of who we are isn't found in a mirror, but in the eyes of those who love us. The end of this tale is just the beginning of our next journey. See you in the next adventure. This was Elias. Sleep well.